you've got to understand Europe from a top-down, pan-European, EU-driven regulation, AFMD, the Cross-Border Fund Marketing Directive, but also from a bottom-up point of view, which is how countries apply national law in a way that suits their economy, their political objective, and things like that. So it's sort of a dual thing to understand. And that is the main difficulties when you're not from Europe and with countries didn't understand it. That's why we had Brexit, or didn't accept it.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the People of Private Capital podcast with me, Ferdy Roberts. I'm the CEO and founder of Asset Class. We're a provider of software solutions to the front, middle, and back office divisions of private equity companies, venture capital companies, essentially any company that's involved in taking offerings, private offerings, to the broader market. Today, I'm speaking with JB Tanqueray, Jean-Bernard Tanqueray, who's the CEO and founder of Dorian. Dorian is focused on providing solutions to non-European fund managers or general partners who want to address the European LP base. For anybody who's ever tried to provide a fund offering in the European sector, you'll understand that there's a lot of complexity to it. There are country-specific rules, there's passporting requirements, there's solicitation challenges that come with entering that market. JB takes some time to demystify some of that, talk about his entrepreneurial journey, having moved from France, from Brittany to London in the late 90s, right through his experience becoming a CIO of a family office, moving then into the entrepreneurial world himself, providing software solutions to the family office space, and then more recently, his launch of Dorian, which, as I say, is focused on making it easier to get your funds in front of a European LP base. It's a great conversation. JB is a great conversationalist, brings a bit of French flair to the conversation. Hope you enjoy it. And with that, let's introduce JB Tanqueray from Dorian here on the People of Private Capital podcast. Great. Well, first of all, JB, thanks very much for joining us here on the People of Private Capital. It's a pleasure to have you here. It's nice to bring a bit of European flavor to the podcast. And so we're stepping up our game here, bringing a Frenchman to talk about bringing funds to Europe. And as I mentioned in the introduction there, you've got quite an interesting background, pretty varied background, both as a founder and as an entrepreneur, but also given your CIO experience in the family office space. I think it's a really interesting mix of skills. And so I'd like to explore a little bit of that. But welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much.
I was interested. We obviously had a chance to talk on a number of different occasions. First of all, I should say, probably a disclaimer here. You are a client of ours. We're delighted to have you as a client and look forward to expanding our relationship over time. But I think what you're doing right now with Dorian, which we'll dive into over the course of the podcast, is really timely as the markets start to pick back up and we see a little bit more activity, a lot more activity here stateside, certainly. But I'm interested, just before we kind of dive into your background, to understand a little bit about the markets in Europe right now. I mean, how do you feel, let's say, the broader private capital markets in Europe are in Europe right now, across VC, private equity, and the like?
Yeah, sure. So what I didn't notice that when it comes to private investors, family office-like investors, over the last 18 months, the things get really quiet, really quiet, with a fear as to understand when it is a good or bad time to get involved again and reallocate. Mm-hmm. And especially true when many multifamily offices tends to be more trend followers than trend setters. So they will wait for anyone to jump on board, for them to jump on board. And therefore you can see a real lag here. When you look on corporate investing, corporate venture funds or direct investing in startups or other businesses, they remain active. You can see that. You can see I worked on clean tech deals, car manufacturers, electric equipment manufacturers get really involved. Either the business or through the corporate venture fund, I see a persistency. Activity remains here because it's here to respond to industrial visions and things like that. Therefore, they remain active. The straight passive financial investors is much slower and got quieter, but I think seems to be picking up again in the US. With a 3 to 6 months lag with the UK and the rest of Europe. I guess H2, and I do believe the half of this year should be more interesting, more dynamic, more open-minded about deal opportunities, across the whole art scope. Today, what remains active, and you can see that, is secondary funds allocation. Been fund in France, we raised $500 million on secondary deals. The ex-CEO of one of the managing partners of Ardian launched $1 billion plus secondary fund. There you see European money very active there.
Yeah. So it's fair to say that it lags somewhat behind the US, but maybe 3 to 6 months. Is that kind of the feeling that you're getting right now?
That's my feeling. Yeah. Of course, we've got two uncertainty that remains very, worrying. The first one is what's going to happen with Ukraine. Of course, the perceived sense of contamination here. And the second thing is also what's happening in the Middle East, because you see what happened in the Middle East had repercussion in Europe. Lots of countries going to vote this year, at least in European election. The expectation that extreme parties, extreme left, extreme right, going to gain ground. That is going to create, what do they really mean at the new balance? The US is going to vote again, elect a new president. So that remains, let's say, contextual uncertainties that may slow down my prediction or not, depending on whether we had a good surprise on economics and on politics since that's normalized.
Yeah. So it's interesting. We'll perhaps dive into some of the local. We'll certainly be talking about some of the local peculiarities of engaging with LPs in the European theatre in a moment. But if I can maybe take you back a little bit, just so people understand a little bit more about you as an individual and your background. Okay. I'm here in New York. I'm to paraphrase a Sting song, an Irishman in New York. You're a Frenchman in the UK. Give us a little bit of background as to how did you, first of all, why did you leave, such a beautiful country with all of your culture and architecture and food and wine? And not that the UK or London particularly is bad. I spent 16, 17 years there myself. I loved it. But how did you end up there? And, what was the kind of genesis of that move?
Well, I think, first of all, I'm a confused Frenchman. I mean, in the age of 7, I went to work and live in London. My family's, on my father's side, is Huguenots, Party British then.
Right.
And I've been going to the UK, spending a holiday in the UK, since my, 7, 8 years old, since I was 7 or 8, that basically got very much exposed to the UK, and that made me, I would say, a Frenchman, a British adoption.
Right.
I love genealogy and genetics, and I do have, family roots. The Tanquerays are actually, originally speaking, from Scotland.
Right. And, I didn't know that.
Going to Normandy with the Vikings, and became, what they called Norman, and back to the UK for religious reasons. On my mother's side, they're from Brittany, the Celtic-speaking part of France,
right,
very close to Ireland. So we've always looked across the channel of the natural space for evolution.
Yeah, very good.
The tradition of this, multi-secular route that's been spanning the English Channel and the Irish Sea, the Celtic Sea, between northwestern France and the British Isles and Ireland. So that's was sort of a natural part of evolution. And you'd be very surprised to see that many people in Brittany, when we had freedom of movement between France and the UK pre-Brexit, would hesitate: do I go to Paris or do I go to London? Basically.
Right. And
back in the mid-90s, sorry, but
yeah,
we're talking about back in the mid-90s, when the men in Europe was under, economic stress because of the high interest rates in Germany, post-reunification, it would take you ages to get a job in Paris, month and a half. In London, you can get a job as a, risk manager at Citibank, which happened to me in 10 days. So there was no hesitation.
So you came across to London, and within a couple of weeks you were working at Citibank. And this of course is pre-Brexit. There was free movement of labor and
the 90s, the single market, single act generations or the Eurostar generations. Yeah,
right. And that was an interesting. I was in London myself at the time. It was a very interesting time to be in London. Very high energy. I mean, you had the growth of internet stocks. You had it was a very bullish environment to be in, and I think you could probably still feel the reverberations of Thatcher's Britain because it was such a high growth phase, and I guess a combination of Thatcherism and Reaganism. Which was get out there and create your own opportunities for yourself. It was, the backdrop of the fall of the Berlin Wall, and everything was possible, right? I mean, it was a very interesting time to be in Europe.
Yeah, there was this book from Fukuyama, The Hand of History. I mean, we thought it'd be, peaceful for generations to go.
Yeah, yeah. And so you joined Citi in London, and how did your career progress from there? I mean, you got quite a varied roles, between then, which I guess was kind of 97-ish. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So just kind of talk us through a quick potted history to bring us up to date with where you are now.
Yeah. So basically, starting my career at 97 to the bank, then I joined Fitch Ratings to rate asset managers.
Okay.
This was actually based in Paris, and I had to spend a bit more time in France to get closer to my parents because my father had a health issue, and we needed support our mum and dad. Yep. And then from that, I became, a sort of Haitian portfolio manager at Fortis Investments. So I got back to London, became an independent consultant in terms of manager selections, had a French company hire and retain a US equity fund managers and help major asset managers improve their investment processes, basically replicating what I learned at Fortis and at Fitch Ratings, and implement that at Cycle Palmer at Fortis Investments, where I settled at the evolving into a fund of Haitian managers, and that took me at the Haitians, head of Haitian selection role at a multi-family office in London.
Right.
And that's how I stepped into the family office work, ending up the CIO of a single family office in Paris and London.
Yeah. And so, one of the things that strikes me about family offices, and I speak to quite a few of them, more so in the US, less so in Europe, but it seems to me like, was it a single family office or multi-family?
So single. I moved from multi to single. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So particularly with single family offices, I'm interested in your experience there, the good and the bad. I mean, what I've heard is, you can obviously, move reasonably quickly because you're in control of your destiny as a single family office. But at the same time, you've got this family, which is mixed up in all of the decision making and I guess the governance associated with that. How did you find that? How did that experience kind of influence you as a person and perhaps give you some insight into what you wanted to do next?
Yeah, and it's a big question asking here. So, and I cannot hide behind Chatham House rule, right?
Right.
What I'm saying here is going to stay and be public. So, no, when I moved from the institutional asset management world into the family office world, especially the multi-family office one, was the back then was really you didn't have this energy to grow a business. It was, you were living on existing wealth. There was no process. Seeing when all they were constructed, decisions, processing, decision-making processes could sometimes look erratic. It was more about the relationship that the head of the family office had with the principal. This is what mattered. The central element of all that is a relationship you have, an influential skill you have and develop with your principal, which when you come from, the institutional asset management world where you smart, where you integrate assets, when you become your salesy and growth in any business, initially family offices were not subject to that. So it was really about the relationship and they didn't really need to grow. And I really question the ability of a family office to actually grow because even, 15 years later, with all the SaaS and platform thing that we have today, I think the quality of a family office relied on the manager's ability to keep and grow a relationship with pure principal. Everyone's very unique. They're covering specific needs, although there's a high commonality in many needs. The psychology, all this is very, it's extremely different and plays a role. Emotions are very important. Keeping the family united is very important. And yes, money magnifies problem. On one hand, it's great. You can do a lot of things and a lot of things you don't need to worry about, but there's a whole new spectrum of things to worry about, governance, visibility, how to keep family united, how do you keep, the parasites away from family, all these kind of things. And since lots of decisions are made on emotions, and how do you rationalize all that in a way that's big and works for everybody? That's a real big difference. And I think that's the reason why lots of multifamily offices are managed by private bankers, because they're already skilled at that.
I mean, I've heard an expression in the past. I think it's from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves over 3 generations. The first generation works hard, rolls up its sleeves to make the money. The second generation, spends the money, and the third generation has to rebuild. And that's, I guess,
that's true.
What every family office is trying to avoid is to create that multi-generational wealth. It is a challenge, but you worked in that space for quite some time, right? So this is from the 2010s onwards, was it?
2007 to 2018.
Okay.
So, Holy catch. But I agree with you 3 things. But I could say there's 2 things. So on one hand, it's a very difficult market because wealthy people, I used to have everything the way they needed to. And lots of people will be keen to respond to their needs because the client, they're the boss. So basically, they can decide how they want, when they want. Nonetheless, I believe that family offices need to play a stronger role at educating family, just to avoid the short sleeve phenomenon. And families will maintain wealth throughout multiple generations, like the Rockefeller among themselves, and to me, the one, all families like the Peugeot in France, the Michelin in France, they've always treated money as a business and as a duty, not as a privilege. And that made a completely difference because they view the money as something they need to keep growing. So it's not a matter of preserving wealth, it's a matter of making sure that wealth serves the economy of today and tomorrow. And that is a massive difference in how wealth is viewed. And I don't want to sound like a French revolutionary thing but how money is viewed as a social duty. And therefore the business. And that's a big difference.
And I know just from our previous conversations, you got a significant family yourself, right? There's 7 of you, I think, in total, including yourself.
My wife. Including me. We've got 5 people.
And did that? I guess depending on when those when your kids are born, Did that help you, you understand the dynamic a little bit more of the family office, just having a large family yourself?
Well, certainly. And that's why, with the last family office, I worked full time before I wanted to jump back into the entrepreneurial adrenaline.
Yep.
The fact that we were raising families at the same time with kids of similar age did get us much closer together. And today we have a truly friendly relationship. There's clearly a strong connection here. And exactly. So we're 4 daughters, 1 son, and I can see how each one is very different from one another. And how family, dynamics change. If one is here, the other one's not here, and I don't know, parents, we have to keep this little crowd together.
Yeah. Very good.
Well, my wife is a psychologist by education, so we're pretty lucky here.
All right. Okay. Well, that helps. What's interesting when I look at your background is, that evolution. And I wonder, because you spent the time since then really as an entrepreneur and founder. And I wonder if your time as a chief investment officer, whether did that encourage you and expose you a lot more to the entrepreneurial mindset? Why did you make that move from investing to becoming, I guess, the vehicle for investment, right? As in founding your own companies, and maybe give us a little bit of background on how that entrepreneurial journey started for you with Finlight and now with Dorian, and the markets that you address, just for our audience to gain an appreciation of that.
And I think one of the main thing that really pushed me into that direction is there's been entrepreneur in my family, so being an independent was something always there in the background. My father had a law business, and my grandfather on my mother's father basically had a horse breeding business. And so there was always a bit of idea and having a business.
You've always had that entrepreneurial
the need to build a business. And a lot of people would say that in a man's life you need to build a wall, and I think my wall was to build a business, basically. Try and build a business, trying to do something about it. And as a family officer, I came across lots of entrepreneurs, found that fascinating. The credibility, the motivation, and there was something I wanted to try. I could not avoid, and that's how I jumped. And still advising that family office until 2018. I developed first of all, it was a company called Strip Your Banker, which was to create a sort of self-serve family office, being a sort of corporate construction software online. And lots of family offices, friends of mine came back to Canada. We did that as where we realized they had a massive data problem. That's how we developed Finlight technology that, using natural language processing to read financial documents and restructure the information and get that ready for them to consolidate complex portfolio more rapidly. I think it would have worked better.
That was focused on the family office. Family
office, and the vision was on a self-serve basis, and I think it would have worked better if we had positioned ourselves as a BPO, business process outsourcing service would have been much better. But that also was keeping me away from also my exploiting my investment background and what I learned from investing, and this really why I left Finlight to relaunch Dorian to sort of reconnect the bridge between LP and GP within this ever complex regulatory environment we're in, and how you have the freedom to choose and remove, or remove might not be the right verb, but make sure that this barrier that here to protect, and don't get it wrong, barrier and not by definition bad, they also hate to play. All this barrier that meant to protect you doesn't play against you, and ability to return the freedom to choose and to allocate your capital where you need to, and vice versa.
So that brings us up to date, which is where you are now as the founder and CEO of Dorian. And so for people who are listening, that's DORHYAN.EU if you want to find out some additional details. And so Dorian, what's the thesis behind Dorian? Who are you trying to attract as potential clients for Dorian?
Yeah. So typically, first of all, financial services is a sector that embraces innovation when it's got to do it, really. Usually it's a compliant thing, okay?
Yep.
And because compliance create a friction, so how do you remove that friction? So that was the first challenge. Yep. And my target clients is really non-European GPs wanted to get into Europe, and also helping European GPs go beyond Europe. Right. And I think we need this sort of investors need for a diversification, i.e., geographic diversification, GP diversification. They also need a broader international network to support the corporate companies. Yep. So they need to have GPs from everywhere, basically. And I think that's how you create sort of a virtuous
diversified portfolio.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's what I worry. How these people were here to support entrepreneurs, growth, the economy of tomorrow, or consolidating the economy of today, depending on where you stand in the cycle, can broaden that cycle to better support the corporate companies. It's really the problem.
Primary driver. Yeah. And it certainly seems to me, based on conversations we've had, GB, that Europe does, or the EU more broadly, does a tremendous job of making it very difficult for non-EU funds to engage with EU LPs, and you're trying to basically make that easier with Dorian, correct?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Just for our listeners, like just to put it in perspective, I know that there are a number of kind of, let's say, regulatory challenges. There's country-specific challenges. Could you just kind of summarize, the challenges that companies, non-EU companies have, either engaging with or marketing to, or even pre-marketing to EU LPs that Dorian helps overcome?
Yeah. So to give a more context to that, it is true that European Union, is a bit of a beast.
Yeah,
because of the special bits. Because on one hand, it's a supranational organization that tries to harmonize law and regulation across Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, got a sort of a social democratic tradition that is very strong, and the idea of protecting. Okay.
Yeah,
but it's not a state. It's got some state prerogative, but it's not a state.
Yeah,
and sovereign state remain at national levels of France, Germany, Brussels, and then it becomes a big ongoing negotiation,
right?
Where you've got different political philosophy conflicting here. The very top-down Jacobin, French approach, where unity means uniformity, and some other country, unity does not mean uniformity. So it's a bit of a delicate and subtle balance here. So you've got to understand Europe from a top-down, pan-European, EU-driven regulation, AFMD, the Cross-Border Fund Marketing Directive, but also from a bottom-up point of view, which is how countries apply national law in a way that suits the economy, the political objective, and things like that. So it's a sort of a dual thing to understand.
Yeah.
And that is the main difficulties when you're not from Europe, and this country didn't understand it. That's why we had Brexit, or didn't accept it, which was one of the things that led to Brexit, or just certain political tensions with countries like Hungary and things like that. Mm-hmm. It's a very unique thing. It's a very bureaucratic construct. And it's funny, I was at a good friend birthday party in Brussels last weekend. She works for the European Union. Right. Quite a few EU diplomats were there, and when you speak to them, they're very bright people with grand vision, but they think from a very legal point of view. It's all about legalism, which for other countries is very novel, especially Anglo-Saxon common law driven countries. So for a non-EU GP trying to get into Europe, it's true there needs to be alert and aware what's happening from a regulatory point of view. The big things like people used to rely on was reverse solicitation. That typically you would go into such country, meet investor, get them to sign a letter to say you solicited me to have this meeting. It's reverse solicitation, and I can trade deals with that.
Yeah,
and this is being basically binned and put to death because that's not reverse solicitation. That was organized reverse solicitation, so not what it means to be a random act out of an investor initiative without any contact beforehand. Regulators really want to control that because they want to understand what's being raised. Because their worry is to fail managing systemic risk. Disagree or agree with the way they do, but you cannot dismiss the objective of being, not to be taken seriously.
Yeah,
and therefore that's really all these old habits are becoming more and more regulated as more and more people allocate to alternative investment assets. It's not before 1% of the portfolio. Now it's 10-15% of institutional and portfolio line. So it's got a different weight. So it needs to be better understood, better organized to make sure you don't create a non-risk basically.
Yeah. So I mean, to kind of summarize the challenge, and most of our listeners are US based funds. We have European listeners also, but the vast majority of listeners are from the US. So if I'm a US fund today looking to expand my LP base to Europe or to the EU, I've got a number of hurdles that I've got to overcome. You mentioned, the various directives that exist out there, the challenges of reverse solicitation, which, as you say, is kind of going away because it's not really. I mean, it's an almost impossible challenge for most of the funds to overcome. I think you've described it in previous conversations as almost like an act of God. That if on the outside chance that an LP approaches you directly, you're okay, assuming that you get them to jump through various hoops and sign various documents. But outside of that, it's very difficult to engage in as a US fund coming into Europe, unless you work with companies like Dorian who can streamline that process. I just wonder what's the appetite for in the European theater for US funds, or let's say non-EU funds. Could be the UK, it could be US. Is there an appetite for it right now? Do you see that returning?
So yes, I mean clearly. But of course, providing they comply, they do not put the allocator at risk by not complying to European regulation. You asked me to summarize, but it's very difficult to summarize in a few bullet points. Reverse edition, free marketing, and things like that. But happy to more later. So there's an appetite because there's a need for portfolio diversification. There's a need for GP diversification. We do know what's happening is it's going to impact the rest of the world. So it's not something you can really dismiss or ignore in a well-balanced, well-constructed asset allocation, especially within the VCP, the US, big weight of the world economy. Can you really dismiss them? Can you just not be exposed to them? Could argue for correlation. Europe is going to expose, is an indirect exposure to Western economies, but still the driver, the mammoth in the US, and due to its own specificities, it is not careful to not have exposure to the same when you liquid portfolio, you will have exposure to S&P 500. In your alternative portfolio, you'll have exposure to the economy through VCNP.
So I mean, appealing to principle 101 of portfolio management, which is diversification, right? As you say, geographically across asset classes, etc. So definitely strong drivers there. what strikes me when I look at, over the course of the conversations that we've had today is that you've got some geographies that are a lot more open, a lot more willing to engage, easier to navigate. I'm interested in your thoughts. I mean, for example, just this past week in New York, I attended a conference with Irish funds, and Irish funds. The Ireland as a provider of services to the fund industry is very significant. There are obviously lots of advantages, tax advantages, and other labor related benefits. But I also think it seems to be, as a regulator, a lot more open and happy to engage in new initiatives. They talked actually about LTIF2, this long-term investment fund proposition that came out a number of years ago. It kind of went through a false start, but this next version seems to be a lot more open. It's lower minimums. Yes, there's regulation and I'm sure disclosures that come along with it, but it's designed to appeal to a broader audience and perhaps almost to, if not retail investors, then certainly to high net worth individuals and, let's say, a broader base of private capital investors. So I'm interested in your thoughts, JB, around if you were to stack rank, and this might be an unfair question, but just in your own experience, the most attractive or most open markets, let's say the top 5 in Europe, to the least, or let's say the most challenging, what would be kind of your most open and let's say top 5 down to the least open for fund managers?
The most open, clearly Luxembourg and Ireland. Obviously, then tries to be open because they want to make things happen.
Yeah,
in Luxembourg and Dublin, could be the most open there. The Netherlands, too, quite open too.
Yeah, okay.
Similar in Netherlands, try to promote their own for regulation. The Nordics remain quite open.
Mm-hmm.
France, a bigger one, remains France and Germany in terms of total capital available. It's France, Germany, the bigger ones. Therefore, because they've richer and with far more assets and more demanding in terms of regulations and compliance. France is clearly one of the purists. Germany doesn't sound as purist as France, but has these little backside tricks to make sure that Germans are not at a disadvantage against non-EU, non-German funds.
Yeah. I mean, it is a highly competitive market. So I guess as a regulator, you've got to strike that balance between being easy to do business with, which I use that word kind of advisedly. It's all relative. But at the same time, protecting the interests of the LPs, and as you say, managing, the potential for systemic risk. So it's a constant battle there. Yeah, that's interesting. So just kind of coming back to the entrepreneurial piece for a moment here. You got exposed, through your work as a CIO. I'm sure you made investments in companies and kind of sat alongside them as they grew. You grew your own businesses. You've now got the Dorian proposition, which you're growing. What's the most challenging part of being an entrepreneur for you, JB? And I'll come on in a moment to some of the most rewarding pieces. Right. But where do you see challenges? As a founder, as a CEO, what presents the biggest challenges for you?
So when you're an entrepreneur, you tend to be quite creative person. I mean, my guess. My creativity went a bit wilder as being an entrepreneur. So me and my biggest challenge is how to channel this creativity toward one clear goal. Resist the temptation, because as an entrepreneur, you make connection where others do not necessarily see as being obvious, and therefore you want to do lots of things at once. That is my biggest challenge, and I think that's one of the reasons why the growth of that was very much slowed down, because we're trying to do too many things at once, because first it was so obvious. Therefore, you're sticking to one line and one line only, a clear positioning before trying to cross multiple chasms is my That's been my greatest challenge.
Yeah.
Greatest challenge.
It is. It is interesting, as you say, when you're the founder, everything is possible, right? And part of the challenge over time is narrowing that focus or the aperture focus in on the things that really matter, that are going to move your business forward. And in many respects, it does force you to be, because you have restrained resources and restrained capital, you've got to really make sure that you're getting the best possible return on that. And there is that constant challenge between, on the one hand, you're an entrepreneur because you've got the creativity and you've got the drive and the enthusiasm and motivation to do things. And so your natural instinct is, if you see something, you want to do something. And but that has to be curbed as well, right? Because you could end up doing, 10, 15 different things. And the point of the arrow is not as strong when it becomes, splintered in that way.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Clearly.
Yeah.
And they're the big things to really be, adamantly rigorous about.
Yeah. Yeah. And what about, let's say on the plus side, what do you enjoy about the entrepreneurial journey or the entrepreneurial experience?
Freedom.
Yeah.
Building something, trying to do something with your talents, that going to serve a broad scope of people, being useful. I think the reason why, materials things, survivors is because they're the expression of our footprint to the world. And it's not a van footprint. It's part of my, belief system. And therefore, what we do is here to stay for long, and I want to make it count.
Yeah, it's interesting. I heard a quote recently, which you mentioned. Your father and your grandfather, in their own way, being entrepreneurial, running their own businesses, and what have you. And the quote referenced, as we get older, whether it's your father or another figure in your life that you respect, well, it can kind of go one of two ways. You either spend your time trying to replicate the strengths of the person that you admire, or you spend your time working against the weaknesses of the people who made mistakes in the past that you do not want to replicate. Either way, agree. I think being an entrepreneur is kind of a mixture of both of those, right? You want to achieve that success, but you also want to make sure that if you are failing, it happens quickly and you don't do it again. And it is a real challenge. But I guess with every experience, as you went through the family office and FinLife and now at Dorian, it gives you a much better perspective on what it is that you need to focus on. Would you say?
Yeah. As I said earlier, my wife, was trained as a psychologist, and she said entrepreneurship was the most expensive yet most efficient, effective analysis ever.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure she's got patient privilege here, or client patient privilege, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was a few entrepreneurs in amongst her client base. There's definitely a lot going on as you're building a business, and the swing of emotions. You can experience the entire spectrum in a day. At least that's my experience.
I mean, I remember, when I went to business, entrepreneurship was 42, and 43, and full of myself, full of confidence. I know better. I've done this job, for like 20 years, nearly 20 years.
Yeah.
And therefore I know what I'm doing. And many people in financial services are very good driven. They certainly believe they're not better than the neighbor.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, entrepreneurship was the most humbling journey ever.
So it's a very humbling experience, JB, when all of your mistakes are on show, your successes are on show. It just comes with the territory of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes, and it's extremely humbling, and it puts things back in a row. You could argue, I mean, when you got when you discover success very early on in your career, it's very easy to estimate the part of your success between luck and talent.
Yeah.
And when you only had positive feedbacks, it's already very easy to get confused as to why you managed to get it right.
Yeah.
And when you let ego prevail, this is when you start making mistakes later.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I heard an interview with NVIDIA is obviously everywhere right now. It's in the news. It's prevalent in private capital by way of investments in AI. I know you're very heavily involved in that and evaluating it for some other family offices. But he made a comment at a recent press conference, and he talked about, the expression he used was, they're overcoming some really significant technical challenges, and there is going to be pain and suffering in NVIDIA while they overcome these challenges. And it was quoted a lot on Twitter and various other social channels as a result of it, but actually celebrated. And what he meant by that, and he clarified his comments, he said that you don't really learn a great deal as a result of success. You learn through mistakes and pain and suffering. That's what informs your character, and your character comes out when you're challenged, right? And it can either be very good, it can be strong, it can be weak. And the strongest characters are those that are hewn out of pain and suffering, in his words, but really challenges. And you don't really get that if you've enjoyed a privileged life of success, or you've gone to an Ivy League school and you went from one success to the next, and then suddenly, as many founders do, they come out of this background, try and found a company and fail because they're just not used to failure. They don't know how to respond to it. They don't have that character in themselves to deal with the challenges that come with being entrepreneurial. I just thought it definitely resonated with me that you get that humility.
And Josh Clooney did a very interesting reel on Instagram or TikTok. On Instagram and kids on TikTok.
Yeah,
you can see the generational divide here. But I moved from Facebook though. Yeah.
Well, you've got what? Did you say 4 daughters and 1 son? Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
I can only imagine your house is probably TikTok 24/7.
Yeah, well, yes, which is the big fight. I mean, the big argument, the big conversation I had.
Right.
And he said, you grow out of failures. And that I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
And it is true. I'm born in the mid-70s in a quite conservative society, part of French society.
Yeah.
Failure was really looked down, it was thrown upon. And very fixed mindset kind of approach. And I think lots of people were brought up with that idea that failing was bad, failing was shameful.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, it's like the image you have in the Bible is about pruning the tree.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Right. To encourage the growth. Yeah. I mean, the environment that we find ourselves in now, which I think is, it's been a period of challenge the last couple of years, without doubt. It's reverberated through the entire industry. I know credit funds have enjoyed some significant upside. AI has been a standout. But a lot of the private capital sector has been challenged. It's starting to come back. Dry powder is now being deployed by VCs. I was at some networking events recently here in the city, and cutting some new checks. Across a number of VCs and private equity firms that I spoke to. They seem to be a lot more bullish is probably the wrong word, but let's say cautiously optimistic. They're getting back into it. So I'm sure we'll see that start to come through in Europe as well. JB, just to kind of wrap up here, for people who are interested in learning more about Dorian or connecting with you, how is it best for them to reach out to you?
LinkedIn.
Yep.
I wouldn't say I'm a LinkedIn addict, but I'm very often LinkedIn multiple times an hour, every hour. So LinkedIn is a very easy one, JB Tanqueray, or you can email me, jb.tanqueray, Tanqueray, Tanqueray, like the gin, basically.
Yep. Okay.
At Dorian, DORHYAN.eu.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. That's great. We'll encourage people to reach out to you.
Thank you.
It's been great speaking to you, JB. I wish you nothing but success with Dorian. Obviously, delighted to have you as a client, and hope
you.
we have a long and fruitful relationship. But yes, encourage everybody to reach out to JB to learn more. We'll also, on our website at assetclass.com, be providing a link to some webinars that we ran recently with JB, which kind of talk in more detail about some of the, let's say, the regulatory points that we brought up in this conversation. So hopefully you'll find that useful as well. But for today, JB, thank you very much for your time, for joining us here on the People of Private Capital podcast, and the very best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, JB.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a lovely day.
Take
Keep
care.
well.
Thank you.
You too. Bye. Cheers.